All right. Hello. Thanks for joining us for the Leadership Dojo and for practice. I want to thank Salunas for being here so early from Hawaii. I know it's very early there. Hi, y'all. I'm Staci Haines, and good to see your faces. Good to see you. I'm going to talk a little bit and practice today around individual and also systemic trauma. I think that in general, we're all dealing a lot with that these days. So we're just going to do some practice and get into some conversation. As we get started, let's go ahead and start with practice. You can practice seated, or you can go ahead and stand up with me. I'm going to stand up to start and make sure my volume is loud enough here. All right. All right, so seated or standing, just going to get ourselves here, organize ourselves a bit. We'll start with centering, and as many of you know, inside of any somatic practice is a purpose, right? So we're always kind of practicing or training something into our somas, into our nervous systems. And with centering, we're practicing getting present, open, and connected. And we're also practicing getting on purpose. Yeah, so we can keep practicing what's important to us and then choosing from that place, even under pressure. And there seems to be a lot of pressure these days. So let's first start by dropping our attention into our sensations, into our feeling self, into our aliveness. So just notice your breath. And see if you can feel your breath as it goes in and out. You might feel it coming into your lungs. You might also feel it coming down your spine. But just really let your attention come into sensation. Noticing breath. Then let's also notice temperatures. Where are you feeling more cool inside of yourself? Where are you feeling warmer? Just starting to identify with sensation, getting inside of our own bodies, getting inside of our own skin. And let yourself notice pressures, where you feel more relaxed or where you feel more taut or tense. Just letting it be, just bring our attention there. And lastly, let yourself notice movement. So there might be pulsing, streaming, digesting. Maybe you notice your heartbeat. Letting yourself really come into the feeling self, the sensing self. We'll just include our thinking, but not primarily being in our thinking, primarily being in your sensing. And then we're going to bring ourselves and bring our attention all the way down to center. So if you just put a hand just below your belly button and bring yourself there. Bring your attention there. Maybe you can feel your belly underneath your hand. Feel your hand on your belly. And start to just develop that dropped, open attention. Locating ourselves around what we call this organizing principle of centering. Yeah, when our attention is lower in the body, it starts to actually calm the entire nervous system. And let's drop more into gravity. So let's just do that today. You can leave your hand there. You can let your hand drop, just leaving your attention there instead. And then let's center in our 4 directions, 4 dimensions. Settling down into the lower body, whether you're seated or standing. And then from that kind of dropped into gravity, you can go ahead and then lengthen, making more space between the vertebrae. Coming to that full length, so you can find the bottom of your feet, contact with the ground. and then lengthening all the way up. And centering, so there's a good balance top to bottom. And then inside of length, we also center inside of dignity, your own dignity and the dignity of each other, the dignity of all life. So organizing ourselves on purpose into length. Really let the shoulder blades drop into the back pockets. Again, let the hips be heavier. And take a good long breath, right? A breath along length. Good, and from all that length, let's move to width. So from this whole center line, widening out, both left and right. Either in your feet or your hips, you can find a good balance left or right. If you want to move back and forth a little bit, that's fine. Widening out across the feet, the hips, the ribs, ear to ear. We all do different things under sustained pressure. We do different things in our own reactions to threats. A lot of times we'll tuck in, sometimes we puff out, but this is a way to just balance again. Feeling ourselves, feeling into width, and letting ourselves really relax and unfurl. So you can come into the width of your body, and then you can also extend your attention beyond your physical form. And let your attention be in width, right, in the room where you're at. Or extend your attention onto the call with others here. Width, we're really centering in relational space. We can let ourselves out, we can let each other in, we can have boundaries, but we're choosing that instead of reacting inside of it. So centered in length, centered and balanced in width. And then let's come into depth. You can drop your attention really inside of your body, more inside of your core, and then feel for your depth front to back. Maybe with the next couple of breaths, just make more depth front to back, right? Our ribs are built to expand as we breathe, to be flexible. And just let your breath expand front and back, maybe make a little bit more space there. You could find the front and the back of someplace on your lower body. Front and the back of your cranium, your head. And then just bring your attention just to the back side. You know, we have this billions of years of evolutionary wisdom at our backs. We have all of our life experience at our backs. Just noticing that backside, that we can really rest into that experience, that history, our learnings. And then coming all the way through that internal terrain, our organs, our lungs, our hearts, right? All of these processes that go on all day and all night without us noticing. All the way to the front side. We can just really let ourselves face the future, face the unknown. Of course, bring our intentions in. And then make sure you're balanced back and front. So you're not pulling back, you're not pushing forward, but you have a good balance. And then let yourself feel your whole self, length, width, depth, with this dropped open attention, with this centering point, right, that we can initiate movement or conversation or change from. And then if you have a declaration, go ahead and speak it to yourself. And if you don't right now, just center on who and what matters to you. Like, what are you about? What's important to you? And then let that really inform your whole body, let it inform your nervous system. So we keep organizing ourselves on purpose around what we're committed to, what's unfolding in us, what's important to us. And centering ourselves there really in that repeated fashion. So we're practicing embodying, right? Embodying what's important to us. And if there's some way that your commitment or what's important to you wants to shift you, go ahead and let it do that. Maybe it's asking you to be more grounded, more in your lower body. Maybe it's asking you to be more open-hearted or more permeable. Just let any of that happen that's really relevant to you. All right, good. And then we're going to do a little bit different kind of rowing this morning. So go ahead and put one foot in front of the other. And then from center, for those of you who haven't done it before, from center, we're going to extend. So that just is from center, bring that aliveness up through your hands, open your hands almost like they're hoses and aliveness can come through them. Or we're extending out to our future, what's important to us. And then what we're going to do in rowing is we're going to bring our arms down and our body back, and then our arms up and put your weight on your front foot. So back foot, front foot. Or if you're sitting, you can just gently rock back and forth. Shifting the weight back and forward. Almost so you can gather energy and extend it out. Breathing as we go. In a moment, I'm going to say change. That means bring your back leg forward and your front leg back as we extend together. And change. Good. Continuing to extend. Rocking back and forth from center. And change. And change. And change every time. Moving from center, just keeping balance. All right, as we're just helping ourselves learn to keep navigating change while we stay extended to what matters to us. Breathing. Good. On the next one, go ahead and pause when your arms are up. And just let yourself take a moment and recenter, relax your shoulders. Balance, centered, extending. Right, extending to who and what matters to us. Extending to the world that we want to build. Good, letting that go. Just take a moment, feel yourself. Whatever kind of aliveness got stirred up, just let it be there. Recenter with more aliveness. We don't have to shut it down or push it out. We can just really make space for it. Let's go ahead and extend our hands down and extend gratefulness, gratitude to the earth. You can name things out loud for yourself, maybe the grasses, the worms, the lemons, whatever you want to extend gratitude toward today. Good, and then taking that and extending gratitude up to the sky, the ever-expanding universe, the nebula, the atmosphere, whatever you want to name today that you're extending gratitude to. And extending out gratitude to people. Again, you can name people, family, chosen family, community, Whoever it is you want to extend gratefulness to today. And then extend that same gratitude internally. So let yourself both extend through your hands and then receive in your torso. So you're opening to receiving gratefulness. And what do you want to extend gratitude to yourself for? Maybe it's your kindness, your perseverance, your fierceness, whatever it is, you can just name it. All right, let's come back together seated for those of us who are standing. Just go ahead in the chat, just drop in, how's your mood this morning? I love it. We have a whole range: angry, calm, happy, sad, wobbly, empowered. Let's welcome all of it. Yeah, make room for all of it. All right. To get us going this morning, that was nice to practice with a group. Thank you. Because we're going to talk about really individual and systemic trauma today, I'm going to just share my screen for a moment and share a handout. And when we send out the recording, we can also send this out. But I want to give us a bit of a somatic definition in how we look at and understand trauma. So from a somatic viewpoint, there's many experiences that can cause trauma. We'll talk about that in a moment. But when we really look from the psychobiology or the soma, this is what we're looking at. That traumatic experiences, what they cause is a shaping that becomes non-responsive to current time experiences. This is when something goes from a difficult experience that we process and work through and hopefully learn and heal from, to something that's traumatizing and gets actually caught in our psychobiology or our somas, and then that we react from, even in situations that don't call for that reaction. So that's when we're kind of getting caught, right, in trauma. So it's the shaping, and we're going to explore it a little bit today, like a fight-flight response that doesn't take in new information, doesn't notice that the threatening or dangerous or violent situation is completed or that we made it through. It's almost like our bodies don't recognize anymore that we made it through. So we get caught, non-responsive to current time experience, and then the survival shaping, it keeps repeating itself when it's no longer needed. It actually generalizes in our whole nervous system, right? From brain to body to musculature to endocrine system. It keeps kind of on high alert, right? Waiting for the situation to happen again, and then those reactions can come very quickly. The other really important thing about experiences that are traumatizing is they're fundamentally threatening what we talk about in somatics as these three essential needs of all people, which we have a need and we're wired for safety. We have a need and we're wired for connection or belonging. And then a need and we're wired for dignity, yeah, or worthiness or being able to make a contribution. So safety, belonging, and dignity. Now, of course, what we also need are resources, right? And that really comes a lot from the broader conditions that we're in, but we all need resources also. So traumatic experiences really overwhelm and start to break apart these three inherent needs. So, you know, when we're doing well or we're thriving, safety, belonging, and dignity are working together. With traumatic experiences and then our survival strategies to them, often what happens is we'll prioritize safety and not belonging. So it's I'm going to stay safe, but I end up isolated. Or sometimes we'll fight for our dignity, but in that be giving up our safety. Or the same thing with belonging, that we'll stay connected and try to keep belonging, even when we're giving up our dignity and sometimes giving up safety. Now, these are not conscious decisions, right? Our survival strategies to traumatic or threatening experiences are very, very quick. They actually bypass, right, the neocortex. They happen in much faster places in the nervous system. But once it's really set up that safety, belonging, and dignity are kind of vying against each other, that causes a lot of distress. So I think the last thing I want to say that's also really vital, and I think vital for our times, is that trauma is an individual and a social or systemic experience. And what I mean by that is, you know, our experiences that are traumatic or threatening or dangerous or harmful, we experience them very personally, and obviously live in our somas very personally. But many of the causes of trauma are systemic causes. So we can look at, and I'm sure you all have been watching the news these many months, but we can even look at the pandemic and how the pandemic is being handled in the United States. And we can see that the harm from the pandemic is rolling out along systemically created lines around race and class, essential workers, who's being most impacted and who's dying the most, right? So we start to see the systemic nature of traumas. Or if we just look at any group of people who is systematically not granted safety, belonging, and dignity, and we call those things racism or white supremacy, we call those things homophobia or heterosexism, right? But it's places where whole groups of people are not granted safety, belonging, and dignity by society. Those experiences are also traumatizing. So an individual and a social experience, we need to kind of understand it through both of those lenses. So, and then the last paragraph there's many experiences, of course, that cause trauma. Some are naturally caused, natural disasters, but most traumas are caused by humans or human-built social or economic systems, okay? So that's what we're looking at. I'm gonna unshare my screen for a moment, and again, we can send that out. I'm gonna today, in a moment, just really have us try on some of the really automatic ways that our mind-body, that our evolutionary wisdom knows how to deal with threatening experiences. But before I do that, does anybody have kind of a question or a comment around that definition of trauma? And if you'd like to, Salunas is going to help us out here, but you can use, do we have the hand raising function here, Salunas? Yes, you can raise your hand using that function, or if you want to drop it into chat, and then Salunas will help me manage questions. Yes, is trauma cross-generational and genetic too? I'm just going to start with that one since I just saw it. There's a lot of amazing studies around the intergenerational nature of trauma. Two things I want to point to. If folks don't know the work of Eduardo Duran, he does a lot of work with indigenous communities and looks at the intergenerational trauma of indigenous people, especially in the US, and of colonization and being removed from one's land. His work is really, really good in looking at intergenerational trauma. And then there's also a book, it came out a long time ago now, but it's by Matt Ridley. And it's a mapping, it's basically looking at the Human Genome Project. I think it's called Genome. And there's a chapter in there called stress. And our genetic sequencing is pretty dynamic, or aspects of it are dynamic with our environment. Not things like height, but other sequencings that help us navigate the world. And what they found in the mapping of the human genome is there's a stress sequence that basically gets turned on saying, hey, the environment is dangerous. And what they found is when that sequencing is turned on in a pregnant mother, that the child, the baby, is born with that stress sequencing turned on, right? Which you can kind of, in the evolutionary wisdom of that, you can get it. It's like, ooh, there's stress in the environment, there's danger in the environment. We want the baby to be as alert also as possible. But inside of that, you can really get what can happen all the way down to the level of genetics in that stress response, right? Being on across generations. Yeah. So Lunas, can you help me? What else should we go for here, question-wise?
Yes. Well, you spoke to the last question around intergenerational trauma. Can you please, we have a question from Julian. Can you please give some examples of what the spectrum trauma worst to least? That's the last question. Julian, do you want to come off and explain your question?
Yes. I was just trying to put it into personal experience. I can understand some trauma is awful, which I don't know whether I've experienced, but what's the least traumatic experience that we have in daily life that is traumatic as opposed to slightly uncomfortable? I mean, I'm just trying to get to know when to use the word trauma or not, when at the softer end. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. Yeah, thanks for asking that, Julian. What's so complicated about answering this question is, and it's one of the things I want to talk about today, so I appreciate that, is when we've had experiences of threat or trauma that really sent us into a high level of hyperarousal or a fight, flight, freeze response, if that doesn't get processed through our somas, an experience later on that might just be an experience of discomfort can actually trigger off this other response. And then it's very hard for us to tell the difference, right? Now, I think we're in a time in history where it's like people are using the word trauma way too broadly. It's like, this was traumatizing, that was traumatizing. I'm like, no, that was probably just upsetting. Or maybe you're sad, or maybe you're pissed. It's okay, we're emotional creatures. We get sad, we get mad, we get ecstatic. That's awesome, right? We have all of those. Mostly what we're looking at is, was there a threat to safety, belonging, or dignity? And did that threat get actually caught, right? Caught in the soma, so that it didn't actually get to process through, right? So there's like a hyper alert or hyper arousal that happens. What we're designed to do is go, right? And then mobilize into a fight, flight, freeze, appease, or dissociative response, get through it. That energy trembles out, releases out, cries out of our somas. And then we come back to a more calm, cohered, present state. That's what we're trying to do in the very big picture with either uncomfortable experiences or even threatening and traumatic experiences. But why it gets complicated for us to assess over time is that often we don't get to process through those threatening experiences, and all discomfort, right, lands in that same bucket in our somatic responses, right? So I don't really like to say, I mean, we can say, we do know, the studies do say, the worst experiences, I'm sorry to say this so early in the day, I'm about to say things that are traumatizing for humans. Worst experiences for humans are witnessing someone being killed, killing someone, watching any kind of dismemberment, terrible for us, sexual trauma, right? And then when you have high levels of trauma, sexual abuse, or beating also in the young years because we're developing, all of those are terrible human experiences, terrible, right? Those are highly traumatizing no matter what. And then there's experiences that are traumatizing for some and not traumatizing for others, but depending so much on their context, their background, their history, and if healing from other experiences has gotten to happen or not. So I'm sorry to be so intense so early in the day, folks, but there's some of the answer. Julian, is that helpful? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does trauma impact children differently than adults? It does. It does, because kids are in such a different developmental process than adults are. We develop through our entire lifetimes, right? We're always in the developmental stage until we die, which is our last developmental stage, right? But because kids, so much is happening inside of kids. I'm sure you all know that early childhood development in neuroscience really tells us that the highest number of neuronal pathways in the brain, and I really want to think of that as neuronal pathways through the whole body, are being built from 0 to 3. Also, kids are establishing an initial sense of belonging in place in the world. Yeah, it can be different if that belonging, like I belong to the earth, I belong to community, gets established early on, and then we have a traumatic experience later. We have that to depend on inside of our somas, and that can be a resource place for healing. If that doesn't ever get established for kids, it means adults, hopefully when they're getting access to healing, are going back and trying to rebuild that sense of, it's okay that I exist on the planet. I do belong to others. That can't be taken away from me immediately. Yeah, so there definitely are differences based on developmental stage. Okay. Yeah.
Staci, we have a question.
Questions
Here.
Yeah, one more.
One more. Sarah wants to know about dignity. Is it something that we know in our bodies in the way that we know safety or unsafety? Or is it something different than that?
Yeah, I always wonder if dignity is the right word. We might call it an inherent sense of worth. Yeah, an inherent sense of worth. You know, when I really look, especially at these times, and like, you know, we're in the the next wave of racial justice movements in the US, right? We are in these uprisings and these reflections, and obviously that's happening and getting reflected in other countries, but it's so central here. But, you know, when I look at the world that I hope we build, it really is a world that affirms over and over again that all people are deserved of safety, belonging, and dignity. That reflects that all people have inherent worth, and reflects that over and over again through the economy, through the media, through our social practices. That would decrease trauma like 95%. If we could build those social and economic structures or containers for ourselves. So dignity, yes. An inherent sense of worth, looking to belong and belonging, and tracking for safety. Those are what we might call unconscious processes, or inherent in us from the get-go. And you will see, you know, kids who are exposed to trauma or high levels of stress, they will be negotiating around, right, or develop survival strategies where they're trying to hold on to their inherent sense of worth. Yeah. So hopefully our environments reflect that to kids. I probably shouldn't tell stories about my kids on public calls, but I'll tell a quick one without naming her. But one of my daughters, she was maybe 5. We had this picture of her on the fridge. She's like standing on a skateboard in her little outfit. And she used to look at the picture and she's like, I'm so cool. Like she would just look at the picture and just affirm how awesome she was. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. That is that inherent sense of worth, and then having no shame about just saying, I think I'm really cool, you know? And luckily we didn't shame her for that. We celebrated that for her. But yes, that is something inherent in us, or you might call it significance, right? Like I'm worthy and others also see me as worthy, like I'm significant or I make a difference for my community. Yeah. All right, just given our time, I'm going to pause on questions here and have us try on these inherent survival strategies that we have. Fight, flight, freeze, appease, dissociate. We don't need to learn any of these. They literally come with our package. They come with our, the evolutionary wisdom in our body selves. And in a moment, I'm going to have us try each of these on, but try them on at like 5%, 6%. We don't need to go full bore. We're going to try them on, feel them, and then we're going to soften them and let them go. This is a thing we want our somas to know, is that we can get into a more alert state and then it can soften and process through, okay? And we all have our own versions of them, so just try on your version. But let's initially start with flight. Yeah, most animals will flee before they do anything else. So you can just feel in your body, if you're moving into a flight response, which is I'm going to get away, just notice again, 5, 6, 7%. What is your soma? What does your body do? I notice in mine, I start backing up and turning away. You might notice what happens with your breath or what picks up in you. And then go ahead and soften that, deepen your breath again. Whatever tissues picked up, see if you can let them go. And see if you can let your weight back down again, your jaws relax. Okay, so flight response, we all have that. For some of that, that's caught really deep in our nervous system because of earlier experiences. For some of it, it's not. That response, fight, flight, will never go away. We need it because it's part of how we navigate the world, plus it's a very deep part of our biology. We just don't want to get trapped in any of these places. Okay, flight, let's do fight. So your version of fight, you might set your jaw, you might puff up a little bit, you might position, but again, just 6, 7%. Try on some of your fight. So I notice for me, my jaw starts to set, my chest hardens, I move forward. Just notice what happens for you in fight. My shoulders mobilize some. Notice what shifts in your soma. You might have an internal narrative that goes along with this too. Notice if that kicks up. And then again, let that soften. Let your breath return. Good. So flight and fight, even though we say it the other way, fight, flight. Freeze is next, and that is a really awesome response to threat. As some of you know, the possum is my favorite example of the freeze response. There's a really great scientific name for what they do, which I can't remember, but possums aren't playing dead. They actually go through a chemical change in which they go into a slight coma state. And they can stay kind of knocked out or in that coma state anywhere from about 15 minutes to an hour. They foam at the mouth, their eyes roll back in their head, and they excrete a smell like they've been dead for a couple of days. It is a very amazing freeze response. I sometimes wish that mine was that developed. I love the smell part. But we also have a freeze response, right? We have a freeze response. And often people, if their somas kick into a freeze response during trauma, they're often very frustrated with themselves afterwards about why didn't they do something? Why didn't they run? Why didn't they fight? But freeze is highly strategic. And again, something much more unconscious in us chooses our responses. We don't consciously choose them, okay? So freeze response, let's try it on. Again, just gently. What happens for you in a freeze response? Again, noticing tissues, noticing breath, noticing internal narrative. And then soften, let that go. Doesn't happen for everyone, but I notice I get very, very quiet inside. Yeah. Okay, fight, flight, freeze, appease. Right, appease is a dog rolling over and showing its belly. Inside of that, the dog is showing its organs. So one, it's basically saying, I won't hurt you, don't hurt me. Right? One bite to an essential organ could really harm the dog. And that's what the dog is doing, is like, I'm going to appease. It's also getting smaller. Yeah. We do these same things. We shrink, we appease, we apologize. Yeah. So let's all try on, what is your version of an appease response? Right. Yeah. Notice what you do. Notice how you do that. Good. Then softening, letting that go. One of the things that I find so amazing about the human appease response, I'm sure you all can relate to, you know, that there's certain people that are more shaped by an appease response who might apologize a lot, who might go, oh, I don't know, whatever you want is fine. Whatever you want is fine. Doesn't matter. I don't really have an opinion about it, right? This like shrinking of width, there's a shrinking usually of length. And often there's a tilting of the head. It's like, right, this. And in this tilting of the head, we're showing our jugular, right? It's very similar to the dog rolling on its belly, that we always have our organs exposed to each other, but this is a showing of the jugular, which is part of really how we shape ourselves into an appease response. Yeah, to me, I find all of this fascinating, right? How all of this, we do it automatically. Yeah, and then we can actually become conscious of it, right? When it's no longer serving us. Yeah. Last is dissociate, and I really want to ask us to do dissociation just a little bit because this can be, you know, sometimes harder to come back from. What I want you to notice, if you try on with us for a minute, checking out, is how do you do it and where do you go, right? How do you do it and where do you go when you do your version of checking out, okay? So let's all try it on for a moment. Just do your version of checking out, 5%. Notice how it feels in your body. Notice how you do it. Okay, good. Shake that off, come back in. Good. I have asked really thousands of people over these last 25 years, how do you check out and where do you go? And I noticed that there are mostly 3 patterns, and I'm sure there's more than this, but you might recognize yourself in some of this. Some people say, I just go into my head, right? That's one version of dissociating out of my body into my head, and I stay there. Yeah. Other people will talk about, oh no, I go out the back And it's so interesting to me how many people go up and out over their right shoulder and either hang out somewhere behind them or put their attention or their self very far away. Yeah. And the third is people will talk about tucking themselves way down inside. They'll usually point to their guts. And if you think about our like miles of large intestines, there's a lot of places to hide and disappear down in there. Yeah. The cool thing about somatics is because we ask the question how a lot, like how do you do that? How's that happen in your body? Is that the way that we dissociate out is also the way back in, right? So in recognizing how we go out, we just already showed ourselves the way back in. Yeah. If I go into my head, the way back in is I thaw out and come back into the senses in my whole body. I come back into sensing, feeling, right? If I tuck myself in my guts, right, then I expand back out. So you get the idea. Fight, flight, freeze, appease, and dissociate. You know, one of the first things we want to do after we start to get to know how these function in us and how they move is we want to thank them. You know, I'm sure many of us, if we kind of went, wow, how many times have I used these in my decades alive so far? One of the first things we want to do, even when we struggle with them, even when these reactions take over, when it's totally not useful, really, they were so adaptive, and they helped us navigate very complex situations, right? Today, they're continuing to help us navigate very complex situations. So one of the first things, of course, we do inside of somatics is we blend with these at the level of the soma, but part of blending is also thanking them and learning a deep appreciation for our own and others' survival strategies. Yeah. Okay, we'll talk about how to do that in just a minute. I want to show you one other image. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat again while I pull up the image I want to show you. And I'm sorry I didn't pull this up before we got on. And if I can't find it easily. All right, too bad. I will send it out. It is not popping up exactly where I thought it was. But the image that I will send you with the recording is an image of really the arc of excitation, right? And we talk about it as the rhythm of excitement, but it's really an arc of excitation where excitation, including a shock response or mobilization into a fight, is an increase of energy, a peaking of that energy or mobilization, and then a release of it. And that could come exactly through moving away from a situation. It can also, our emotions work this way too, where there's a building of emotion and then a releasing of emotion and then a coming back to a more calmed, coherent state. What happens inside of things getting caught in our somas, which is what happens in trauma, is when that arc of excitation doesn't get to happen fully, is that arc, instead of getting to process out, rolls in on itself and then gets caught in our mind bodies as a contraction, as a numbness, as this potential of protection or mobilization that didn't get to enact. So it's something rolling back in on itself. And I'll send you those images because sometimes that's a simple way to understand it. Okay. So one other thing I just wanted to do in our time here, y'all have really good questions also. Let me ask you this. Do you want to do a blend or do you want to do more Q&A? Just put it in the chat real quick. Blend, 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 blend. Oh, good. Thank you. Y'all are very congruent. Great. So I'm going to have us do it with our fists first, and then I'm going to have us actually do it on our own bodies. Okay. So with one hand, make a fist. With the other hand, get present in the other hand. And then gently wrap the fist with your other hand and support it in the direction it's going. So you're not trying to pry it open, you're supporting in the direction it's going, just to the pressure it wants. If it wants a lot of pressure, give it a lot of pressure. If it wants a little pressure, give it a little pressure. But support it until you can feel the fist softening and relaxing. You might even feel your shoulders relaxing. You might feel yourself taking more of a breath. Okay, let's switch hands. Make a good fist, like a fist that's trying to protect something in this hand. Just be present, caring, benevolent in the other hand. And then wrap this fist and support it in the direction it's going to the amount of pressure that works for that fist. And notice, might just soften a little bit. I notice my breath really comes back when I do it. And you might even try a little bit softer. Okay. This is the principle of a blend for the person that said, what the heck is a blend? This is the principle of the blend inside of somatics. And that is that our first move in somatics isn't trying to pry open a place in the self that's contracted. It isn't trying to get rid of it. The first move inside of somatics is actually supporting the contraction in the direction that it's going. Because what we assume is any numbness in the self, any popping automatically up into the head, any sustained contraction, right, in the body, that there is an adaptive wisdom inside of it, right? So instead of trying to get rid of it and fix it, which I know that feeling, I have wanted to fix many things in me over time, but instead of doing that, we really cultivate this orientation of the first thing that we do is blend, which is literally a visceral honoring of the numbness, of the contraction. Because we go behind that numbness, behind that contraction, behind that habit is an adaptation that had wisdom inside of it, right? Thank you for sharing that exactly. Often blending, what will happen is immediately there'll be some level of opening, and that might be an opening in the tissues, or it could be a somatic emotional opening, like the person who just shared that they started to cry, okay? Now, there are other moments in the somatic process where we do work with the tissues and help the tissues open, because any tissues that have been contracted over time, it's like they lose their range of opening and closing, right? This is what muscles do. They open, they close, right? Literally, fascia can get adhered to muscles, and we want to open that up. But our first move is this blend. All right, so here's what I'm going to invite us to do. Is find some place in your soma where you go, no, this is a place where I tend to hold, contract easily. I feel a sense of numbness. Could be your jaws. It could be, for many of us, it can be the upper chest. It could be a shoulder that tends to curl in. Maybe for you, it's your thigh, right? Or it could even be your hips, yeah? Decide for you, where's one of those places? And then in a moment, what we're gonna do is just what we did with the fist, which is we're gonna support that in the direction it's going. Let me show you a couple of examples. If you notice that your chest or your upper chest is taut often, a blend would be that you'd add pressure to your chest. You might add it in and up. Yeah. Or it could be, I'm going to stand for a moment. It could be if it's around your hips or a leg, that you might also put your hands there and push in. If the contraction is pulling in, you just add pressure in. Or if the contraction is going up, you add pressure in and up. Right? Could be the same thing on a leg, in and up. Yeah. So most contractions do that. They go in and up. Some will bear down. If it's bearing down, do that. But you get the idea. You want to blend in the direction it's going. So with your own touch, get present. Yeah. Decide where you're going to make contact. I'm going to just do my jaws. And you're going to make contact in the same way we did with the fist. Not too much pressure, just enough to support it in the direction it's going. Then be present with your sensation. Notice what happens with your breath. There might be emotions, there might be stories. Just notice. Good. Just gently let that go for a moment. And then we're going to do it one more time. If in all that we've kind of talked about today, you're a little pulled up and out of your center, just take a moment before we do it again and let your attention drop back to center. Make sure you have some decent breath going on. That you can kind of be present in as much of your body as possible. And then if that same place still makes sense, do there again. Or if you want to go someplace else, you can do that. Be present in your touch, right? Present, kind, benevolent. We're in this honoring mode. And then just go ahead and make contact with yourself again. Adding just a little bit of pressure and support in the direction it's going. Right, we're not trying to change it, we're being with it and supporting that adaptation or that habit or that survival reaction, right, in the impulse that it has. All right, excellent. Letting that go. If you want to put any response in the chat, feel free to, or just feel free to keep feeling yourself. I think what I want to say, just given that we have a couple more minutes here, that move of blending, that move of befriending, or that move of respect, we really want to get that into our practice as our first move instead of fixing, getting rid of, being frustrated with. Those responses are so understandable. I have them too, but they don't tend to open up more choices, right? This kind of supporting what is tends to begin to unravel and open the story, the emotion, the kind of potentized energy that's there, and then allows it to start to move, right? Anything that's caught in our soma or fixed or numb, fundamentally what's inside of it is an impulse that got caught, that instead what we want to do somatically is help it come back into movement. That movement can be trembling, that movement can be emotion or tears, that movement can be a sense of streaming, right? There's fairly typical ways that that kind of caught experience moves out through our tissues, through our somas, through our cells, right? So we're moving back into some level of movement. Yeah. Thank you for what you're putting in the chat. Tears. It's beautiful what people are saying. Breath releases. Yeah, softening happens. Stories. Yeah, that's all great. All right, there was our practice for this morning. Nice to share it with you all. If you want to come off mute and say anything as we complete, feel free to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Staci.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Glad to be here.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be
Thank
here.
you.
Everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. So supported.
Thank you very much.
Staci.
Good to see you all.
Thank you all.
Such a gift.
Have good days.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Bring love to the day, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. That was great.
Thank you.
Hey,
Peace, peace, peace.